Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into the deep end of Arvind Adiga's novel, The White Tiger. Specifically, we're unpacking Chapter 1, The First Night. We are going to decode the completely twisted yet totally fascinating confession of our entrepreneurial anti-hero. So picture this. The novel kicks off with our narrator, Balram Halwai, writing a letter late at night. But he isn't just writing to a friend, right? He's writing to the Chinese premier, Wen Jiabao, who's visiting India. Balram is this wildly intelligent but completely unschooled guy, and his letter is this bizarre cocktail of extreme flattery, like almost uncomfortable flattery, mixed with deep, biting cynicism. He literally tells the premier, "I consider myself one of your kind." It's bold. He sees himself as a powerful, great man, totally disregarding his low-caste background, and confidently declares, "I am tomorrow." And honestly, this perfectly sets up exactly who we're dealing with here. Think of this explainer almost like a true crime psychological profile. In his letter, Balram freely admits he's an entrepreneur, sure, but he also casually mentions a wanted poster of himself. Yeah, he's a fugitive. And even more shockingly, he flat out admits to murdering his employer, right out of the gate. I mean, who does that? Why would a self-proclaimed mastermind just confess to murder on page 1? Well, to understand the crime, we have to look at the world that built the criminal. Section 1. A Tale of Two Indias. If we really want to get Balram, we have to wrap our heads around the massive socioeconomic divide that rules literally every second of his existence. He tells us that India is essentially two countries stuffed into one. It's a literal and figurative split right down the middle. On one side, you've got the India of light. On the other, where he's from, the India of darkness. And guys, this isn't just world building. This is the core metaphor for the entire novel. Let's break that down a bit more. The light represents the big, booming urban centers, places like Bangalore and Delhi. It's all about wealth, tech outsourcing, that artificial city glow, and absolute freedom. But then, in stark contrast, you have the darkness. This is rural India, specifically Balram's home village, Laxmangarh. The darkness is defined by extreme, crushing poverty, disease, and this suffocating feudal history that just won't let go. And here's the kicker. The wealth of the light is built directly on the backs of the darkness. The people in the light oppress the darkness so thoroughly that the poor kind of become unconscious of their own subjugation. It just becomes their normal. And nowhere, absolutely nowhere, is this darkness more devastatingly captured than in Balram's take on the river Ganga, or the Ganges. Now, traditionally, this is a sacred holy site, right? A river of life and purification. But Balram radically flips that script. To him, it is definitely not a river of life. It's a river of dark, sticky, suffocating mud that just traps and chokes you. He describes his mother's funeral on its banks with this pure, visceral horror. The mud consuming her body is a literal representation of the inescapable hopelessness of his social class. For Balram, the river isn't salvation. It's a trap. Section 2. Predators in the darkness. So, if the darkness is this giant trap, well, who set the snare? Balram introduces us to the 4 wealthy landlords who mercilessly exploit the poor in his village. And notice how he strips them of their humanity? He just calls them the animals, the raven, the stork, the buffalo, and the wild boar. It shows us that his home isn't a functioning society anymore. It is devolved into a literal jungle. And in this jungle, it's strictly predator and prey. Eat or be eaten. You either fight ruthlessly to get ahead, or you accept being a slave. There is no middle ground. Just consider this wild comparison for a second. Balram describes the daily life of a water buffalo owned by one of these landlords. The animal is pampered, well-fed, completely content, and deeply treasured. But right next to it, you have the lower-caste humans living in brutal, extreme poverty, totally deprived of basic human necessities. So why does Balram put these two images side by side? It's to hammer home a harsh reality. He's showing us a society so deeply corrupt that a literal beast of burden is treated with infinitely more care and respect than a human being. Section 3. The Half-Baked Entrepreneur. Faced with this brutal reality, Balram knows his only way out is using his brain. But his education is, well, it's far from traditional. Despite being incredibly smart, his family pulls him out of school so he can smash coal and wipe tables in a tea shop, just to pay off their debts. This leaves him with what he famously calls a half-baked education. Basically, he didn't get to finish school. Instead, his classroom is the tea shop, and he learns by secretly eavesdropping on the wealthy customers. He builds his entire worldview by being what he calls an original listener, rather than an original thinker. But here's the fascinating part. Balram doesn't see this as a weakness at all. Actually, he brags to the premier, saying, "Entrepreneurs are made from half-baked clay." He openly mocks the fully formed fellows, the guys who spend 15 years in fancy schools and universities, only to end up wearing nice suits and taking orders from other men until they die. Balram strongly believes that having to take responsibility for your own survival out there in the real world builds a kind of grit and street smarts that formal education just can't teach. Which brings us to a super important question for our analysis. How does being half-baked actually make Balram more dangerous? Well, think about it. Because he's molded by the harsh reality of the tea shop and the survival of the fittest law of Laxmangar, rather than in the polite, moral classrooms of the light, his mind becomes incredibly cunning. And most importantly, he is completely unburdened by traditional morality. He realizes pretty quickly that to be a successful entrepreneur in India, you have to be straight and crooked, mocking and believing, sly and sincere, all at the exact same time. Section 4. Becoming the White Tiger. So how does a half-baked boy from the darkness ultimately justify a cold-blooded crime? To answer that, we have to look at a massive physical symbol in his village, the Black Fort. Growing up, this fort is the ultimate barrier for him, both physically and mentally. It looms high over the village, representing everything he wants, but also the terrifying fear he has to overcome to get it. Years later, when he finally climbs up to that fort, what does he do? He spits down at the village. It seems small, but that spit is a huge psychological turning point. It's him ruthlessly rejecting the terrified little boy he used to be and completely rejecting the poverty that tried to keep him chained down. Because at this point, Balram fully sees the trap he's in. This is where he starts formulating his famous theory of the rooster coop. It's this horrifying system where the oppression of the poor is so total and so absolute that the oppressed actually internalize it. They literally guard their own cages, guys. They make sure their own family members don't escape. Understanding the insidious nature of the rooster coop is exactly what gives Balram the desperate, burning motivation to go freelance, no matter the cost. And that brilliantly brings us to the title of our novel and Balram's ultimate alter ego. Back before he was pulled out of school, a visiting inspector was blown away by Balram's smarts and honesty. He gave Balram a nickname, the White Tiger. Now, a white tiger is a super rare creature with superior intelligence. But giving him this label is incredibly dangerous because it plants the seed of deep exceptionalism in Balram's head. He starts to truly believe that because he is a white tiger, he is somehow exempt from the normal rules, that the moral codes of the jungle just don't apply to him. Just listen to the exact words the inspector used. He says, "You, young man, are an intelligent, honest, vivacious fellow in this crowd of thugs and idiots. In any jungle, what is the rarest of animals? The creature that comes along only once in a generation? The white tiger." That single spark of validation changes Balram forever. It absolutely fuels his conviction that he's destined for more than slavery. But it also hands him the ultimate moral justification. He reasons that if the devil went freelance to escape God, well then he has to go freelance to escape the rooster coop, even if that means murdering his master. Which leaves us with a deeply provocative thought to wrap up this explainer. Balram basically argues that the sheer, desperate struggle to win your freedom in a corrupt system completely cancels out traditional ideas of good versus evil. So, if breaking free from an absolutely rigged, corrupt society requires a ruthless, murderous ascent, is Balram a hero or is he a villain? Does a society that brutalizes its own people justify the creation of a monster to beat it? That is the massive moral puzzle Arvind Adiga drops in our laps in just the very first chapter. Keep that question burning in the back of your mind as you read the rest of the book. Thanks for hanging out with me for this explainer, and happy analyzing!